Because in Genesis chapter 43, Joseph is testing his brothers. He's testing his brothers. He's testing them to find out what's going on in their heart. Because last time Joseph saw his brothers, well, last time he saw them, he had accused them of being spies, a crime punishable by death, remember? And they were afraid. Now, they didn't know that was Joseph. They hadn't seen him in 20 years. They assumed he was dead. He was clean-shaven. He was dressed like an Egyptian. He walked like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. He was talking to a translator. So they didn't identify it as Joseph. But last time Joseph saw them, before that encounter, was 20 years earlier when they had wanted to kill him. And Joseph's estimation of his brothers is that they were cruel men. The way that they had treated the men of Shechem, the way Reuben had tried to overthrow his father's house by sleeping with his father's concubines. I mean, Joseph's estimation of his brothers were that they were cruel men and wicked men. And after 20 years, he wonders about them. Now, when they show up, there's 10 brothers, but who's not present? Benjamin. Now, when Joseph left, Benjamin was probably about 2 or 3. He was just an infant. So by this time, Benjamin's going to be about 22, 23 years of age. And Joseph must have wondered if Benjamin was still alive. Joseph must have wondered if his brothers had done to Benjamin what they had tried to do to him, and that was to kill him. If they had treated him with the same cruelty. And so Joseph tested them the first time, and he said, go back and bring your youngest brother, bring Benjamin with you. And that was the test. Bring him back. And so now the brothers are coming back. This is what we're going to see in Genesis 43. They're coming back, and they're coming back with Benjamin. So let's open up in Genesis 43:1. It says, now the famine was severe in the land. So it came about when they, and this is Joseph's sons, had finished eating the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back, buy us a little food. Now again, God has caused the famine to come upon the land, so they're experiencing some hunger pains. And so circumstances are driving them back to Egypt. And again, what we see here is God providentially controlling the situation where He's going to move people geographically in order to fulfill the promise that was spoken to Abraham back in Genesis 15:13 that we've looked at before. Verse 3, Judah spoke to him, however, saying, and this is a reminder, the man, and who's the man here? Joseph, right? He's the man. The man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy you food. So what we see here is Jacob's favoritism toward Benjamin is causing family problems just as it had done with Joseph. Go back to Genesis 37. Genesis 37 verses 3 and 4. Now remember, Jacob before had shown favoritism towards Joseph, and it caused a family problem. Genesis 37:3 says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his brothers, because he was the son of his old age, and made him a vari-colored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Now this doesn't justify their hatred. It doesn't justify their jealousy. But Jacob, because of his favoritism towards this one particular son, it causes family problems. But what he's doing here in Genesis 42 and 43 is he's showing favoritism towards Benjamin. And so everybody's got these hunger pains because Jacob won't release Benjamin to go down to Egypt. So it finally comes to a crisis point. The hunger pains are getting advanced here. Verse 5, but if you do not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you. Now you've got to remember, Simeon is in jail now. He's probably been there for several months. You know, Simeon's probably wondering what's going on. You know, what's keeping my brother so long? Verse 6, then Israel said, why did you treat me so badly by telling the man whether you still had another brother? The reality was Joseph knew. But Jacob here almost blames his children. You know, why do you treat me so badly? Why did you give up this information? Like it's their fault. Verse 7, but they said, the man questioned particularly about us and our relatives, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? So we answered his questions, that is, they answered him honestly. And could we possibly know that he would say, bring your brother down? And Judah said to his father Israel, now Reuben had tried this once before and failed, so Judah's going to try it. Judah said to his father Israel, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. We as well as you and our little ones. So there's children involved here as well. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. Now it's interesting here that Judah should be the one that should offer to be surety for Benjamin, because Judah, if you remember back from Genesis 37 verses 26 and 27, Judah was the one who suggested selling Joseph into slavery. Back in Genesis 37:26, it says, Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our flesh and our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. So do we see a change in Joseph's heart here? That previously, 20 years earlier, he was ready to sell his brother, he was ready to kill him and sell him. Now that's a pretty cruel brother. I mean, that's pretty bad. But here we see a different Judah. Judah here is willing to offer to be surety for Benjamin. So rather than betraying his brother, he's willing to offer protection on his behalf. So people can change. And this is what we see. Judah has changed. Verse 10, for if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. Then their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. He's going to offer some practical advice. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and carry down to the man as a present a little balm that is used for medical purposes or medicinal purposes, and a little honey, aromatic gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Well, they had some food here, but these are luxury items, and apparently they had just a minimal amount. And he says, take double the money in your hand, and take back in your hand the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. And then finally he relents. He says, take your brother also, arise and return to the man. He says, and may God Almighty, and this translates the Hebrew El Shaddai, and the fact that he refers to him as God Almighty, you almost get this idea that Jacob is in effect saying, look, I'm going to give you this advice to take him a present, take him double the money, take the money that you had in the sacks, here's all this practical advice you can do. But you know what, at the end of the day, that may not be enough. And at the end of the day, it's really going to fall to God himself as to whether or not there is success on your journey. And may God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man, so that he will release to you your other brother and Benjamin. And then he finally just surrenders himself. As for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. And there's just sort of a giving up to fate here. I mean, there's sort of a mixed attitude. He seems to have faith in that he references God, but then he almost seems to just be surrendered to blind fate as well. You know, if I lose my sons, I lose my sons. So you can kind of feel a little sensitivity towards Jacob here. I mean, he's really in a jam. He's really in a quandary. He doesn't want to lose his sons. He's already been hurt once before. So you can feel for Jacob a little bit. And sometimes that happens to us when we find ourselves in a difficult situation. We tend to be a little self-sensitive. And I think that's what's going on here with Jacob. So he reads on, verse 15. So the men took this present, and they took double the money in their hand, and Benjamin. Then they arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. So now the drama escalates here. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, that is, that Benjamin was alive. He said to his house steward, "Bring the men into the house, and slay an animal, and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon." Now you must have wondered about the sense of anxiety that Joseph's brothers had when they traveled from Canaan down to Egypt. They must have thought over and over again, what are they going to say? What's the situation? Is Simeon still alive? What's going to happen to our brother Benjamin? Because we're carrying him with us. What if the present isn't enough? I mean, they're probably running this through. I mean, that's human nature, right? I mean, don't we all do that? Don't we run? I mean, they're going to a land where they've already been accused of being a spy, a crime punishable by death, and they're going back. And so you know that they've got to just be mulling this over in their head. And so now they show up, and Joseph calls for this dinner. Calls for the dinner. Okay. Where are we? 17. So the man did as Joseph said, and they brought the men to Joseph's house. Now, this is a little different from their last visit. So they're a little suspicious. Now, it's been said that guilty minds breed suspicious hearts. And Joseph's brothers have some guilt in their past. They have some issues, don't they? And they've already admitted that all this trouble that they're going through is a result of their guilt of how they treated their brother Joseph. So they're a little suspicious of what's going on. Verse 18, now the men were afraid, assuming the worst, because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we are being brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall on us and take us for slaves with our donkeys. Boy, these guys are suspicious, aren't they? But what do we have here? We have another example where perception is not equal to reality. What they need is more information. But they're a little jumpy. And they're jumping the gun. And they're assuming the worst. Well, we do that as humans too, don't we? So this is a very real situation. So again, their guilty consciences from their past actions made them suspicious of Joseph's innocent behavior. That also makes you wonder how much Joseph knew about them and how much he's capitalizing on this. Verse 19, so they came near to Joseph's house steward and spoke to him at the entrance of the house, and this was to plead their case, to plead their innocence. And said, O my Lord, we indeed came down the first time to buy food. And it came about when we came to the lodging place that we opened our sacks, and behold, each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full. So we have brought it back in our hand. We have also brought down our money in our hand to buy food. We did not know who put the money in our sacks. So again, they're pleading their case. They're saying, in effect, we're innocent. We don't know what happened. Here's the situation. We were going back. We found the money in here. So they're pleading their case. Verse 23, and he said, be at ease. Literally, shalom lachem. Be at peace. In other words, relax. So he wants them to be calm. Be at ease. And do not be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. Now this servant is very helpful here, and this is an interesting shift in the account of what's coming up. Because the fact that the servant mentions God makes you wonder if Joseph had been doing some evangelizing. Joseph was very open about his faith. And by the way, when it comes to evangelism, evangelism is really a discussion you have with people. It's talking with people rather than talking at people. It's a discussion you have. It's a dialogue in which you go back and forth. You communicate. You dialogue. It's a question and answer. It's not a ram, cram, and jam information down someone's throat in an attempt to try to force them to believe. And often that's the way evangelism is presented. And I think that's quite a shame. Because we really should be dialoguing with people. We really should be engaging with people. Talking, answering, asking questions, giving information. But you have to wonder if Joseph was really talking with his servant, because the servant begins to talk about God. He says, "Your God and the God of your fathers has given treasure in your sacks." And also by doing this, he's putting that seed, that understanding, that thought of God in their minds. And so now as they're coming into the situation with Joseph, they have God. They're factoring God into their thinking. He said, "I had your money," that is, I received it. And then he brought Simeon out to them. Now this must have comforted them, must have comforted Simeon too, to finally be out of prison. So he's brought out to them. Then the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water. And they washed their feet and gave their donkeys fodder. Again, acts of kindness. So they prepared the present that they had brought for Joseph's coming at noon. For they had heard that they were to eat a meal there. Now who knows how long they sat in the house? 20 minutes? 2 hours? But they prepared this meal out, and don't you know they arranged it several times. They probably thought the pistachios should go on the left, the balm should go on the right, you know. They probably arranged this. I mean, they wanted everything to be just so, you know, because they're nervous. They're not sure what's going on. And you have to wonder what's going on in Joseph's mind too. Because Joseph is all morning at the office, right? Joseph is at work, and he's thinking about what he's going to say when he comes home for lunch. He's going to see his brothers. He's already seen Benjamin coming into the city. And don't you know that Joseph was at work, but his mind was on his upcoming meeting with his brothers? You ever done that? You ever? I have. I've been that way, where you're at the office, but your mind is elsewhere, you know, because you're anticipating something coming up. So verse 26, when Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which was in their hand, and bowed to the ground before him. So here we have again that in their ignorance, they unwittingly fulfilled the prophecy that they would bow down to him. So again here we see unknowingly God's providence bringing about this fulfillment, right? Then he asked them about their welfare, and he must have really been playing poker. He must have really tried to put on a straight face, and he said, "Is your old father well, of whom you spoke?" Well, that's his father too. But he's testing them. Is he still alive? And they said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed down in homage. So again, bowing down. And don't you know, every time they did that, Joseph thought of that dream. It must have just kept popping up in his mind. And then in verse 29, as he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, his full brother, he said, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke to me?" And then before they could even give a response, he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." And here Joseph offers a blessing to his brother Benjamin. And at this moment, Joseph can no longer contain himself. And Joseph is a sensitive man. And it says Joseph hurried out, for he was deeply stirred over his brother. Because he's alive. And he sought a place to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. And then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, "Serve the meal." So they, that is the Egyptian servants, served the meal. They served him, that is Joseph, by himself. And them, that is Joseph's brothers, by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is loathsome to the Egyptians. So you have three groups here. You have Joseph eating by himself, Joseph's brothers eating by themselves, and the Egyptians eating over here. Now the Egyptians wouldn't eat with the Hebrews, they wouldn't eat with Joseph or his brothers because they're Hebrews. But Joseph's brothers have no idea what's going on. And as far as they know, the Egyptians aren't eating with Joseph, probably because he's a higher up official, because Egypt in this time had a caste system. And so there was that division there within their society. But you have this distinction here. Verse 33, now they were seated before him, that is, Joseph's brothers were seated before Joseph, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in astonishment. In other words, they were seated from the oldest to the youngest in chronological order, according to birth order. Now you must really, in their mind, when they looked down the line and saw everybody lined up in birth order, and then they started looking at each other like, hey now, what's this? I mean, that must have really sparked some suspicion. Because how does this guy know to line us up in this order? How does he know this about us? You see? So now they're really beginning to wonder. And it says that they looked at one another in astonishment. Of course, Joseph knew, didn't he? Joseph knew their birth order. And so he's messing with their heads. But he's testing them. He's testing them. And here comes the test. Well, he already saw part of the test answered in the fact that he saw Benjamin alive, because that answered one concern that he had. Here's the second part. He took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Now here's what's going on. Joseph's brothers had been jealous of him because of his previous blessings that his father had shown towards him. Remember that? And here he tests them to see how they would respond to Joseph's blessing Benjamin. So he lines up all the brothers, he gives them all food, and then right in front of their eyes, he puts 5 times the amount on Jacob's plate. And then he sits back and he watches. And what's he watching for? Jealousy. He's watching to see if the jealousy that motivated his brothers to want to kill him and sell him into slavery is still present. He's testing them. And this is quite a blatant test. And what does the text say? So they feasted and drank freely with him. There is no jealousy among his brothers. This is a good sign, because they pass the test. You see, Joseph is testing them. Joseph isn't opening himself up to anybody. He wants to be intimate with his brothers. He wants a close relationship. But he doesn't want a close relationship with who they were. He doesn't want a close relationship with who they were. So he's testing them to see if they've changed. And little by little, we're seeing that they have, in fact, changed. And there will come a time that Joseph will open himself up and reveal himself as Joseph. So let's take up some summary points. The central idea of the text is that Joseph tested his brothers to see if jealousy still motivated them to treat others harshly, especially Benjamin. And that's really the central idea of the text. It was a test for his brothers. And this was very intentional, that when Joseph set up the whole situation for this lunch, He knew what he was going to do. He knew he was going to give Joseph this large portion, and he wanted to see how his brothers would respond. He was testing their hearts. Point number 2, Jacob's sons still have faults. And we see this. They're very suspicious. They have guilty consciences. They still have faults. However, they appear more mature than before as they show genuine responsibility for the protection of Benjamin. Right? We see that. Because before, 20 years earlier, they were willing to kill and sell their brother. Now they're offering protection for Benjamin. They also offer to repay the money they thought was mistakenly placed in their grain sacks. And they show no jealousy toward Benjamin when he is clearly favored in their presence. These are clear indicators of maturity. Clear indicators in Joseph's eyes. I want to read this quote up here by Alan Ross. He says, this episode presents the brothers in a different light than before. From Judah's kind speech to his father, in which he was willing to take the blame for any harm to the lad, to their open acknowledgement regarding the money, to their enjoyment at the feast in spite of the favoritism to Benjamin, the brothers displayed a greater maturity about their lot in life. They were aware of God's intervention more than ever before, and so they demonstrated the proper response under the testing of Joseph. He nails it. When I read that, I thought, bam, that's it. He nails it right there. Great statement. Point number 3, Joseph had legitimate concerns. Had legitimate concerns about his brothers based on their past actions toward others and toward him. Now that's true to humanity. Look, if somebody has done you wrong, if somebody has betrayed you, lied to you, stolen from you, if somebody has mistreated you, you know, what's the saying? First time, shame on them. Second time, shame on you. Right? Because there's a legitimate point where you can close the door and you can say enough is enough. You know, I'm not going to be a doormat here. I'm not going to be a victim to you. And so Joseph had legitimate concerns about his brothers based on their past actions toward others and also toward him. However, he holds no grudges and does not seek revenge. Now that's very important. He does not seek revenge. Look, Joseph could have. Think about it. He's in a high position of authority. When they waltzed into Egypt, he could have had them all thrown into prison. He could have had them all killed. But Joseph is not revenge motivated. He's not revenge motivated. Now, was there a temptation there? Well, I think for some believers, there's clearly that may be a struggle. I mean, for some believers, it may not be a struggle. For maybe Joseph, it wasn't. But for some believers, revenge motivation is a struggle because they want to retaliate. And the Scripture is very clear on that we are not to seek revenge, beloved. But we are to leave room for the wrath of God. For vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay, saith the Lord. Right? Very clear. So even though Joseph has legitimate concern about their past actions toward him and others, he holds no grudges, he does not seek revenge, but rather shows them grace. And at times restrains his great compassion for them. He still loves them. He still has feelings for them. He wants to be in a relationship with them, but he's not going to be stupid about it. He wants to be in a relationship with them, but he wants to know that they are of a righteous enough character to enter in to that intimate place in his life. That's why I went through this study this morning on the doctrine of righteous friends. Because this is totally appropriate to what we're looking at here. You've got to be careful who you choose to be intimate in the inner circle of your life. And we all make choices as to who we bring in, and we should be wise. Joseph is here being wise. Point number 4, Joseph loved his brothers, but wanted to know that they were righteous enough to be trusted before he entered into a relationship with them. That's what David did later on. Remember what we read in Psalm 26 and Psalm 101? David would not associate with the evil, with the wicked. He would not bring them into his intimate counsel. Would not. That's wise. There's wisdom there. So point number 5, and this is for our personal application. As Christians, we should love all men and seek to meet their needs, both spiritually and physically, if they're willing to have them met. If they're willing to have them met. However, close relationships should be developed over time only as we get to know others, hearing their words and watching their ways, and feeling confident that they are among the faithful righteous. Isn't that what Joseph is doing right here? Isn't that exactly his actions? Isn't Joseph wanting a close relationship with his brothers? But he's watching them. He's listening to their words. He's watching their ways. And once he sees enough of who they are, he then feels confident enough to open himself up and to enter into that relationship with them. It's exactly what's going on. Now we're seeing it in the testing phase. We're seeing it in the testing phase. And it gets better. Because Joseph's brothers prove themselves. And this is good news. It's good news because it shows that people do change. And sometimes the people that hurt us a long time ago may have changed. And maybe we can have a close relationship with them now. Maybe we can trust them enough to let them in, to be close. Maybe we've changed. Maybe we were the dirty, rotten, low-down, hurtful person who hurt other people many years ago. And maybe we've chosen to live righteously. Maybe we've chosen to be a different person. Maybe we've chosen to be caring and compassionate and loving and not jealous or hateful or hurtful. Maybe we've changed. And maybe other people need to see that in us before they'll invite us back into their life because we've hurt them. Right?